America will again and soon be open for business. Very soon. A lot sooner than 3 or 4 months that somebody was suggesting. A lot sooner. We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. We're not going to let the cure be worse than the problem.
What the hell is this? Been watching the news, Rhonda? I think I'm going to be staying in the shop today. I got to tell you, I got something really interesting on the bench today. It's something pretty rare. I got a 1952 Borg Warner T86 3-speed and R10 Overdrive setup. But the reason why this is rare, it's because it's from a 1952 Nash Healey, which in that year only 150 of those cars were made. The Nash Healey was a 2-seater sports car made from 1951 through years 1954. And through that whole period, only a little bit over 500 cars were built. So who knows how many of these are actually in existence. The T86 3-speed and R10 Overdrive combination made by Borg Warner was used in a wide variety of applications, from Studebakers to Jeeps, Fords, you name it. It was a pretty much staple transmission for a lot of older cars. But every one of these units has a little bit different variations in the length of the input shafts, the types of cases, and how they're used. So this is a very unusual setup because it comes with a torque tube setup on the back end, and most of them just had a regular output shaft like for a drive shaft. So you have to be very careful working with these units because these parts are no longer available, so you don't want to be banging on stuff with hammers. You have to be very careful removing anything, because if it breaks, you're not going to be able to get it. A lot of the bearing retainers on these transmissions are super long with very long input shafts. Same thing with the Studebakers, very long input shafts. So any tapping on the retainer, you can actually smack that retainer off and break it. So you don't want to do that. So let's get taking this unit apart and see how it works. I'm going to go send everything out to get blasted. This is going in a cool restoration. I think you're going to like it. So let's get a rundown on this unit here. What you got is a conventional 3-speed, where you have reverse going back this way, first gear, second, and third. No big deal. The overdrive, which is behind the 3-speed unit, you got this little soup can looking solenoid. On the opposite side over here is what's called a governor switch. So basically what happens is the car reaches a certain speed, the governor kicks in after I think 25, 27 miles an hour, completes a circuit to a relay, which energizes the solenoid, which pushes a pole in there and locks the planetary setup up to step everything up, and you get overdrive. This little mechanism over here, if you notice when I put it in reverse, it moves, right? What happens is, in reverse, this locks out the solenoid from being able, it's a mechanical lockout. It prevents the solenoid from engaging the overdrives so you don't lock the unit up in 2 gears at once. It's got an overrunning clutch inside, or some people call a sprag, that makes it work in direct mode but freewheel, okay? And this thing over here is attached to a cable on the dash that you would pull. If you wanted to lock the system out completely, you can push the cable in and lock the unit in, and therefore you won't get any overdrive. Or depending on how the cable is routed, it would be pulling or pushing, it doesn't matter. But this is simply a mechanical rod that goes in here and locks the solenoid and blocks it from going in and engaging the planetary internally. We're going to get to all these things inside and to show you how it works. Let's get this overdrive unit off and see what happens. All right, so I put a little wood underneath this unit because I don't want things resting against the governor switch. And these bolts were kind of already loose. There's 4 bolts on these. I think that there was some sort of bracket over here. The reason why these bolts are very long, obviously, so there must have been some sort of bracket, maybe for mounting it on the cross member, because it doesn't look like there's any rubber mounts anywhere on this thing. So I got a feeling it mounts from above and hangs on the car. Hopefully I can get gaskets, or I might have to even make gaskets for this, because who knows. It looks like this might have been a part before at one time, because it doesn't look like there's any type of gasket here. It looks like maybe there was some sort of sealant. But there's also a seal over here, so I would gather that they didn't need anything here, but it looks kind of rough. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But that's that. So now we're going to try to put this back down here again. Get rid of this. Maybe I'll get some other wood and just support this a little bit better. Right, so this whole area is all caked up with muck, all sorts of mud and dirt and debris. And I'm going to have to clean this all out before I can remove the governor. So let me clean this up and we'll get this off and some of the levers off before we take the overdrive out. Anytime you have shafts with these tapered dowels, you want to heat up the area around the dowel pin to expand it a bit. Worst thing you want to do is have a dowel get stuck in the case and be beating on it. I had removed all that fancy white paper that was underneath this because it's just annoying. It spins around, makes my life difficult. It comes right out. Whoop. All right, that's that. It's held in with the pin here, you see? All right, so let me loosen up these bolts here. See what we got. There's 4 bolts, 5/8 heads. It appears that they have pretty thick heads too to them, so they're kind of unique to this. And if you're restoring, you may want to have the correct bolt markings and not lose them. So that's important. Let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. So what we don't want to lose here is these sprag elements. And what worries me about this thing is it looks like it had a lot of water in it, which is not cool. I think we're going to have to try and replace this if the raceway is badly damaged. Doesn't look too bad. All right, so there are clips that hold these sprag elements in place here. They pry out with a screwdriver. I had to take those gloves off. They were just really grungy. I have a hard time working with gloves, guys, but sometimes stuff is pretty nasty and I'll wear gloves. But most of the junk that I don't like is out of the way now. So I'm taking off the solenoid bolts. There seems to be a bracket here on the bottom, okay? And these are 1/2-inch head bolts. And from what I remember, I think you just rotate this thing to disconnect it. Let's see how that works. There's a flat, and you rotate it. So what you got here is you have a flat on the side here, you see? And you just rotate it, and it disconnects from the rail. You don't want to damage these things. These are like reconditioned. You can buy them. They're almost $300 brand new. So you can test it to make sure it works. And if it works, clean it up and reuse it. But be careful. Now that that's out of the way, we could slide this whole thing right out, okay? And deal with it later on. Now you see we have the transmission output shaft in this whole assembly over here. So you can see that these planetary gears are pretty rusty, and we're going to have to blast this whole thing and really clean it thoroughly, make sure it's okay. I'm going to call up some of my buddies and see if they have any assemblies kicking around, but this is in pretty bad shape. So you can see when it gets moved like this, you have the planetary action, and then when you do it, it's locked direct. It's a very simple procedure. And nothing is really chewed up or bad in this unit. It's really in great shape. So hopefully we can just clean this thing up and it'll be okay. Just got a lot of water in it over the years from it sitting. Okay, so now that I've got this all cleaned up, you could see that there's clearly a hex underneath here for a wrench to go on. It was completely caked in with rocks and mud, but here we have it. The problem is this is around, I'm going to gather, I tried to put 1 1/8 and 1 7/16 was too big, so it's probably 1 3/8 wrench that goes on here. And the problem is I don't have a wrench. I have it that big, but I don't have it this thin to get inside of this. So you can, since this is all molded as one cast iron piece, you could put a pipe wrench on here if you're careful. And you don't want to put any heat on this if this is, basically stuck on here, because there's electronics in here, so you don't want to melt anything. My suggestion is to basically take a punch and just tap this lightly over here like this. And it'll come right out. Now this is the governor sensor, and you'll see it'll have a drive gear underneath it. Hopefully this isn't ruined by water as well, but that's what that looks like. All right, we're going to just carefully put, these things are very expensive, so they're hard to find. Again, you got to be careful working with this stuff. Now, what's unusual again about this setup here is that your output shaft and planetary are all one piece. They're sandwiched in here with some snap rings on the torque tube type of shafts. So what I have to do is, this is just glued in with like Permatex that they used back then. They used to use a thing called Indian head shellac. And what I'm going to do is heat this up simply to try to get underneath there and pop this out. Because underneath this is a snap ring that's going to hold the output shaft to the bearing and the bearing to the case. So the only way to get this output shaft is to take this glued in piece out. Indian head shellac is still available, but there's a lot better chemicals today to use to make chemical seals, so to speak. So just heat this up a bit. Again, have to be careful, use your judgment. I'm going to get in here with a pry bar and try to pry underneath of this a bit. It's coming up. Get some more heat on this. You can't hear it, but I can hear it expanding a little bit and contracting. That looks pretty hot now. Now I'm going to have to probably clean this up a little bit with the Dremel tool when I put it back on and take out all these burrs. And I would gather this is going to be a little hot, but okay. So what you got here is a snap ring that holds the main shaft to the bearing right over here. And then covered in a bunch of junk is another snap ring over here that holds the bearing into the case. So what we're going to do is take this snap ring off, punch the shaft through, and then take this snap ring out and punch the bearing out. These are very small snap rings. Going to try not to overstretch it, but already the shaft dropped out. There's the snap ring. Let's toss this way. There you go. That's the planetary output here. So there's a spacer for the snap ring. We don't want to lose. So over here is the other part of the snap ring to take this bearing out. Hopefully this is a standard size bearing. I'm pretty sure it is. But we're going to have to loosen this up a bit. And that's tight. So it's not even moving. can't even get in here to just try to, yeah, okay. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is take a long punch and go in through the inside and punch that bearing out. Boy, is that all rough and rusty. So now we've got the overdrive pretty much disassembled. We're going to take this and bring it to the one place to get everything degreased. We'll remove all the plugs from it. There's a spring in here we're going to have to take out. All right. That's the spring that goes in for the reverse lockout. We don't want to get that lost. And pretty much the housing's ready to go. We'll pop out the seal, some of this hardware over here that was on it. A lot of times these seals, believe it or not, are the same seals that were used in the new T10 4-speeds, so they're still available. So we got the housing completely apart. We're going to leave this plug in here. There's no reason to take that out. That's a plug for machining the bore. We'll take out the fill and drain plugs and clean that up. These are your speedometer gears. And underneath this is going to be a Woodruff key. Don't want to lose that. And so I'm going to remove the cover bolts now. 6 bolts, 1/2-inch heads on them. I've never taken this off before, so they must have taken it off because there's actually a stamping in this cover that says front over here. And obviously it was towards the back. A lot of these top covers, it's something a lot of people don't know, they vent through the cover. There's a little hole over here, and on the opposite side, the gasket has a hole in it. So it just vents through the gasket. And that's how it works. Again, you want to be very careful with these band retainers. Yeah, somebody's been in this before. These bolts are way too loose. I usually don't like it when people, unless this thing was just loose, who knows, but I really don't like it when things are loose like this. Yeah, okay. I want you to see something here too, is these transmissions never had front seals. A lot of them don't have front seals. What they do is they have a little thread inside this so that when the oil is circulating in here, the input shaft forces the oil back into the transmission. It's kind of like what they call an auger pump. So it's a little pumping mechanism that they have. I guess they wanted to have oil flow through the bearing. I don't understand that because it would seem to me it'd be a lot easier to just put a front seal in it. But these retainers are very rare, very hard to get. You don't want to damage it in any way at all. Now we can see here that this bearing, the cage started to separate and come apart. See? So obviously this bearing was changed once before, even though it's destroyed again. But they put a lot of Indian head shellac and glued the bearing in. So I'm just kind of heating it up to melt that shellac out of here so everything moves a little freer. And I'll start to see the shellac start to boil, and I know it's loose. It's old school. I'm doing this to try and free up the snap ring a bit. It's really in there tight. I have to take these gloves off again. Now what I'll do is I'm going to put this snap ring back on here so that I can pry against the bearing if I need to. There you go. Now, oh, lovely rust here, huh? So you can see that this is the piece that comes in with the solenoid and holds the part of this planetary stationary so you get overdrive. Very messy. Anytime I have tapered pins, I always heat the area before I try to punch them out. All right, so it's time to take that front bearing off with my trusty OTC puller. And what I like about this puller, it's got a very long end on it, so it's not that bad. This bearing will come off pretty easy. They're not on there tight anyway. You can see by doing that, everything just kind of frees up. And you could move things out of the way. Well, let me get a camera in there and show you. By taking this whole thing out, we can disconnect the forks, move them out of the way, pull everything up out of this way, and then disconnect everything, drop the counter gear down, and take the free speed apart. I'm going to disconnect the input shaft from the output. Pull that out. Synchronizer hub out. Rings. The main shaft. Then we could take out the fork. Looks brand new almost, the fork. And the reverse and first fork. We'll work on taking the counter gear out next. There's going to be a retainer plate over here that keeps the two counter shafts from spinning. You just punch them out, remove the plate. Looks like somebody made this out of tin. It's been apart before. It's no big deal. Inside the input shaft, there's needle bearings that drop down. Everything is really rusted in this, so we'll see how everything works. But that's that. This looks good, the gear. It's just got some rust on it. Everything will get blasted. I'm taking out the arms, the shift arms. Everything's a little rusty. I can pop the cams out now. Now there's a bunch of needle bearings that fell out inside here in this mess. So I'm not going to just drain this oil. I'm going to put it on one of those kind of absorbent towels, because I don't want to lose any of the bearings and the interlocks that are down inside the case there. That's what I mean. This is your interlock. It's got interlock, and there's going to be another ball like this in there. What I'm going to do now is just tap out the idler shaft a little bit. Your thrust washers. Now, these are not going to come through. You're going to have to take the cluster and flip it like this and take it out. All right. And when that happens, the tube is going to fall down into the box along with the other needle bearings and thrust washers, which we're going to just let drop onto this cloth. So these transmissions are very simple. As far as the rest of the stuff is the 2-3 synchronizer assembly. Just slides right off the main shaft. The gear is on bushings inside, and so you may want to check them out. They look good. The synchronizer ring is shot. It's all flattened out. It's worn out, the ring. So it's going to have to be changed. Hopefully we can clean up this main shaft from it sitting so long it got rusty. Notice, again, if we're taking this first and reverse gear off, okay, the direction of the shoulder for the shift fork, it's facing forward. Now this main shaft and rear bearing simply go on with a snap ring in here. Same thing as those other snap rings. That's another shield or slinger on the back side of the rear bearing. And the rear bearing rests against the shoulder on the main shaft, and it's got another snap ring over here. And again, this one looks like it was apart again because the snap ring is all stretched out and deformed. So again, this doesn't make your life a lot easier sometimes doing this type of work, especially if somebody's been in here before. Snap ring for the rear bearing. We'll see if this comes out. So the next step is to get everything cleaned up. That's your main shaft. Critical points are going to be this area over here on the tip where the needle bearings run, that it didn't get too deformed from rust. If I clean the shaft up and it polishes out okay, if not, I'm going to actually have to send it out and get it weld repaired so that and restore the bearing surface. And usually what I'll do is this will get all cut down and then it'll be hard welded and then reground to the proper dimension. Everything else looks fine. This is my only concern, is this part right over here. So that was a real mess. One of the reasons why I don't like rebuilding transmissions, because sometimes you never know what you're going to get into. There's going to be at least probably about 6 hours worth of cleanup alone on this job, between prepping the case, cleaning it all out, blasting everything, degreasing, and then checking every surface to make sure it's still usable. You know, making sure the surface finish is okay for the bearings. If not, these parts will have to be sent out and actually re-welded and brought back up to spec again. So I'll get into that when I get it all cleaned up. But again, one of the reasons why I actually don't do a lot of rebuild jobs, I took this particular job in because it's a unique transmission. There aren't too many rebuild videos on the Overdrive. The R10 Overdrives and the R11 Overdrives, pretty much very similar. And back in the 70s and 80s, I did quite a bit of these, and there were a lot of parts available for them, but now there really aren't. So some of the parts on these, the great thing about them is they're interchangeable with some of the T10, some of the T90 parts, which are still kicking around. And I know a lot of people in the industry to get some surplus parts. It's not going to be a problem. But again, quite messy, huh? So thanks for watching. I appreciate it very much. Please subscribe to my channel and share my videos. It would be most appreciated. It's going to be at least, again, probably about 3 months maybe before I can even get this thing back in here to do video on. It's going to take some time for the customer to sort out what they want to do, and we have to price everything out, what's going to be needed. I have to go over all the electronics and test it, make sure that's okay, and there we go. So again, thank you. Appreciate it.